Reading lamp on my nightstand was still on when my phone buzzed at 1:52 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep in the armchair again, something my wife used to scold me for back when she was still here to scold me. A half-finished glass of water on the side table, the TV on mute showing some late-night infomercial, and my phone face down on the armrest, vibrating like it had something urgent to say. I almost didn't answer it. I'm 64 years old. I retired 18 months ago after 31 years as a civil engineer. I go to bed early. I don't get calls at 2 in the morning. Nobody does, unless something has gone wrong. I flipped the phone over and squinted at the screen without my glasses. The number wasn't one I recognized, a local area code but not a contact. I let it ring twice more, then picked up. Mr. Harlan? A man's voice. Young. A little breathless, like he'd been rehearsing what he was about to say and still wasn't sure he had it right. My name is Cody Marsh. I'm a paralegal at Dunmore & Associates. I'm sorry to call at this hour, sir. I know how it must look, but I need you to hear me out before you hang up. I didn't hang up. Something in his voice stopped me. Not panic exactly, but the particular tension of someone who knows they are about to say something that cannot be unsaid. I'm listening, I said. He took a breath. Your son brought a document to our office today. A power of attorney, effective immediately. Full financial authority. He asked us to have it ready for notarization first thing tomorrow morning. I sat up straighter in the chair. He mentioned you were planning to fly out to your cabin in Vermont this weekend, Cody continued. He said you'd been having some memory issues lately, that you'd agreed to let him handle things while you were traveling. The room felt very still. Mr. Harlan, I've been with this firm for 3 years. I've seen a lot of these documents come through, and I want to be clear. I could lose my job for making this call, but something about the way he talked about you today didn't sit right with me. The way he described your condition, the way he kept saying you wouldn't mind, that you'd already agreed, that it was just a formality. A pause. He also mentioned your brokerage account with Meridian. Said he needed access to it immediately after the filing. My brokerage account. $460,000 I'd spent 30 years saving? My retirement. The money I'd planned to leave to my grandchildren. Sir, Cody said quietly, I don't think you know this document exists. I didn't say anything for a long moment. The infomercial on the TV showed a man smiling too wide, holding up something shiny. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. No, I finally said, I don't. My son's name is Nathan. He's 38 years old. He has his mother's eyes, and my stubborn jaw and a handshake that people always describe as firm. When he was 9, he once stayed up all night to help me finish building a birdhouse for his mother's birthday, because I'd miscalculated the wood and run out with 3 pieces still to cut. We went to the hardware store together when it opened at 6 in the morning. He carried the bag home without complaining. I've been living off that memory for a long time, longer than I should have. His wife. I'll call her Carla, because that's her name, and she's earned having it said plainly. Moved into their house 2 years ago, after their wedding in Savannah. She's 10 years younger than Nathan, quick-eyed and quick-tongued, with a way of steering conversations that I never noticed until I started paying attention. Before I retired, I hadn't spent much time paying attention. I was working. I was grieving. My wife, Ellen, passed 4 years ago, ovarian cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to the last morning, I held her hand in a hospital bed that was too small for how large she had always seemed in my life. After Ellen died, I sold the house in Dayton and bought a smaller place in Raleigh to be closer to Nathan and the kids. 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl, 7 and 5. I thought that was the right move. I thought proximity to family was what I needed. What I didn't realize was that proximity can work both ways. In the months after I retired, Nathan started stopping by more. At first it felt like attention, like care. He'd bring the kids over on Sundays. He'd ask about my finances, just checking in, Dad. Making sure you're not getting scammed online, you know how those calls are. He suggested I consolidate my accounts to make things simpler. He mentioned a financial advisor he knew. He brought paperwork twice that I signed without reading as carefully as I should have. because he was my son, and I trusted him, and I was tired, and my reading glasses were upstairs, and it felt ungracious to make him wait. I understand now that what felt like care was something I don't have a clean word for. I didn't sleep after Cody's call. I sat in that armchair until the sky outside went from black to gray to the particular pale blue of early morning in October, and I thought about every interaction I'd had with Nathan in the past 18 months, and I arranged them in a different order than I'd arranged them before. The financial advisor who'd suggested moving half my savings into a managed portfolio, an advisor Nathan had referred me to, whose business address turned out to be a suite in a building Nathan's company leased. The conversation about my Vermont cabin, how maintaining it was a lot for a man my age, how maybe selling it made sense, how Nathan knew a buyer who was ready to move quickly, the doctor's appointment Nathan had scheduled for me last spring, the one where the physician had asked me a series of questions about my memory that had seemed strange at the time. Not a regular checkup, I realized now, but something more like an assessment, something that might generate a paper trail suggesting cognitive decline. I wasn't declining. I was lonely, and I was grieving, and I was 64 years old, which meant I sometimes forgot where I'd put my keys, but so does every person alive. I called my own attorney at 7:30 that morning. His name is Patrick, and I've known him since our kids were in Little League together. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was already in the office and already drinking bad coffee, which is exactly what I needed. I told him everything Cody had told me. I heard him go quiet the way lawyers go quiet when they're no longer being social but professional. "Don't sign anything today," he said. "Don't go to Vermont, and whatever you do, don't let Nathan know you're aware of any of this yet." "What do I do?" "You come to my office at 9, he said, "and you bring everything you can find." The next 3 days were the loneliest I've spent since Ellen died. I went through files I hadn't opened in a year, bank statements, brokerage records, the documents I'd signed that I now read carefully, word by word, in the good light of the kitchen table. 2 of them were what Patrick would later describe as concerning but not yet actionable. One of them, a form I'd signed in July that I'd thought was a routine address update for my investment account, had added Nathan as a joint account holder with full withdrawal rights. I hadn't known that. I would have sworn in court I had known that because I had known that. I called Cody Marsh back from a number Nathan wouldn't recognize. The young man answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "I want to ask you something," I said. "Why did you call me? You said you could lose your job." There was a pause. My grandfather was a retired schoolteacher. He built up a little savings account over 40 years. When he got sick, my uncle handled things for a while. Another pause. There wasn't much left by the time we figured out what had happened. My grandfather never said a word about it. I think he was ashamed. I didn't say anything. "I recognized something in the way your son talked about you," Cody said. "The way he kept emphasizing that you were confused, that you wouldn't remember. I don't know, Mr. Harlan. I just couldn't sit on it." "You did the right thing," I said. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that." Patrick spent those 3 days building a picture. He contacted Meridian directly and flagged the account for a security hold, citing the unauthorized joint account modification. He reached out to a contact at the state attorney general's office, someone who handled elder financial abuse cases, and described the situation in broad terms, without my name, to understand what thresholds needed to be met. The threshold, it turned out, had already been met. On the 3rd day, Nathan called to ask why I hadn't been in touch. He kept his voice easy, the way he always did when he was managing me. Asked how I was feeling. Mentioned that the power of attorney was ready. That it would just take a few minutes. That it was really just a precaution. I told him I was having some trouble with my knee and hadn't been sleeping well. I told him we'd get to the paperwork next week. He said that was fine. He sounded relieved. That night, I sat in the armchair again and thought about the birdhouse. I thought about the boy who'd woken up early with me and carried the bag home and hadn't complained. I thought about what happens to people, how something shifts in them sometimes without you seeing it shift, how a person can become someone you don't fully recognize, and you keep extending grace because the person they used to be is still so vivid in your memory. I allowed myself one night of grief. I think I was entitled to it. What happened next didn't happen all at once. These things never do in real life the way they do in movies. There was no single dramatic confrontation, no moment where I slapped papers down on a table and watched Nathan's face fall. It was quieter than that, and in some ways harder. Patrick filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina State Bar against Dunmore and Associates for facilitating what appeared to be financial elder abuse. The managing partner, not Cody's doing, but the partner who'd taken Nathan's case without asking the right questions, was placed under review. The state attorney general's office opened a preliminary inquiry. A financial crimes investigator named Mr. Tillman called me on a Tuesday afternoon and asked me questions for 90 minutes in a voice that was patient and precise. He'd seen this pattern before, he told me, more times than he liked. They looked at the managed portfolio account. The financial advisor Nathan had referred me to had moved $62,000 of my money into instruments that benefited a holding company. A holding company that, when you followed the paperwork far enough, had Nathan's wife listed as a silent partner. $62,000. That was what they'd gotten so far. When Nathan was formally contacted by investigators, he called me first. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that started calmly and got less calm as it went on. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said I was being manipulated by people who didn't have my best interests at heart. He said I should call him back immediately. I didn't call him back. His wife called from a different number an hour later. I didn't answer that either. Patrick handled the communication from that point forward. That was the right decision, even when it was hard. Even when Nathan left a second voicemail that was quieter and more frightened sounding, and in which I heard something that might have been real. A splinter of the son I'd known, asking me to just talk to him, please. Dad, just talk to me, please. Dad, just talk to me. I replayed that voicemail more times than I should admit. Each time hoping I'd hear something in it that would make the math come out differently. Each time arriving at the same place. The investigation took 7 months. In the end, Nathan and his wife were charged with financial elder abuse and fraud under North Carolina statute charges that carry real weight in the state, as they should. The financial advisor was charged separately. Nathan lost his real estate license during the proceedings. They paid back the $62,000 as part of a settlement and accepted plea agreements that included probation, community service, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting either of them from having any financial authority over me. It wasn't prison. There were days I thought it should have been more. There were other days when I thought about my grandchildren, who had done nothing wrong, who were 7 and 5, and would be living with the consequences of what their parents had done. And I was grateful the sentences hadn't been longer, for their sake. That's a hard set of feelings to hold at the same time. I hold them anyway. 2 weeks after the plea agreements were signed, I drove to the office building where Cody Marsh worked. I'd looked up his schedule through the firm's reception desk. I told them I was a client following up on a notarization matter, which was accurate enough. He was eating lunch at his desk when I knocked on his open office door. 26 years old, maybe. Thin, with the slightly rumpled look of someone who works long hours and hasn't quite figured out how to dress for them yet. He looked up and it took him a second to place me. When he did, he started to stand. I waved him back down. "I'm not going to take much of your time," I said. "I just came to tell you in person what I told you on the phone. You did the right thing." He shook his head slightly, like he wanted to deflect the credit. "I mean it," I said. "You called a stranger at 2 in the morning because it was the right thing to do. You risked something real. I want you to know it mattered." I set an envelope on his desk. He looked at it, then at me. "That's not a bribe," I said. "That's not payment. I don't believe in those words for what this is." I paused, trying to find the right language. "My wife and I had a college fund set aside for our grandchildren. When the estate was settled, there was a portion left over that we designated for. I don't even remember what we designated it for. Something responsible. Something future-looking." I nodded at the envelope. "There's enough there to cover your bar exam fees and your first year of licensing costs if you ever decide to go that route. If you don't, use it however makes sense. There are no strings and no expectations. It's just, you reminded me that decent people exist, and I wanted that to mean something in your life." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then my grandfather would have liked you." "I hope so," I said. "I would have liked to meet him." I still have the cabin in Vermont. I go up every October when the maples turn and the air gets that specific cold edge that feels like the world clearing its throat. I bring a thermos of coffee and a book I probably won't finish, and I sit on the porch for a while before I go inside, just looking at the tree line. Ellen loved that cabin. She said it was the only place she could hear herself think. I talk to my grandchildren on video calls every Sunday now. Their parents have supervised visitation rights, and the arrangement is still being sorted out through the family court. I don't try to influence what they think about their father. They'll form their own understanding when they're old enough. My job is to be the grandfather who shows up on the screen on Sunday mornings with a bad joke and a genuine question about what they're reading in school. Last Sunday, the little one asked me if I was ever lonely. I told her the truth. I said yes sometimes, but that loneliness and being alone weren't the same thing, and that I'd learned to tell the difference. She thought about that for a moment, with the focused expression she gets when she's deciding whether an adult's answer deserves more questions. Then she said, "Grandpa, I think you're pretty smart for an old guy." I laughed harder than I had in a long time. There are things I wish had been different. Whole years I'd give back if I could, knowing what I know now. The signatures I should have read, the questions I should have asked, the specific kind of loneliness after Ellen died that made me want so badly to believe that proximity was the same as closeness, that a son stopping by on Sundays meant everything was all right. I'm not angry anymore, not the way I was in those first months. What I feel now is more like clarity, the kind you earn rather than find. I carry my phone with me everywhere now, not out of fear, just because I've learned that the most important calls sometimes come from numbers you don't recognize, at hours when the rest of the world is asleep, from people who owe you nothing and choose to call anyway. And I always answer. I think about Cody a lot. Not the way you think about someone who saved your life in a dramatic sense, more the way you think about a detail that keeps revealing new meaning the longer you sit with it. A 26-year-old man eating lunch at his desk, who didn't have to do anything, who had every practical reason to stay quiet and who picked up the phone anyway because he'd watched something similar happen to his grandfather and he wasn't willing to let it happen again to a stranger. That's what people don't talk about enough. The cost of doing the right thing when no one is watching and no one will ever know if you didn't. Cody risked his job. He called a number he wasn't supposed to call. He stayed up worrying about a man he'd never met, and when I asked him why, he didn't give me a speech about justice or morality. He just told me about his grandfather. That's integrity. Not the word on a motivational poster, but the real thing. Quiet, and inconvenient, and personal. Nathan had intelligence. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. He wasn't reckless or impulsive. He was patient. He built things slowly. The referral to a financial advisor, the signed documents I didn't read carefully enough. The doctor's appointment framed as routine. It took planning. It took a clear understanding of how trust works and how to exploit it. And that's the hardest part to reckon with, because intelligence without a moral foundation isn't a gift. It's a tool, and tools take the shape of whoever is holding them. What I lacked, for too long, was clear-eyed judgment, not intelligence. I built a career on solving complex problems. But grief does something to your reasoning. It makes you want things to be all right so badly that you start seeing what you want to see instead of what's there. I trusted Nathan not because the evidence supported it, but because I needed family to mean something after Ellen died. That need made me careless. And carelessness, I've learned, is not a small thing when the people around you are paying close attention to your blind spots. What got me through the 7 months of investigation wasn't anger. Anger came and went. What carried me was the decision, made quietly on a Tuesday morning in Patrick's office, to stay methodical, to document everything, to not tip my hand, to trust the process even when it moves slower than I wanted. That takes a particular kind of endurance. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind you see in movies, but the everyday kind where you just keep showing up and doing the next right thing, even when you're exhausted and sad and not entirely sure how it ends. I placed that envelope on Cody's desk because I believe actions accumulate. What we do comes back around, not through fate or cosmic design, but through the simple, observable fact that how we treat people shapes the world we end up living in. Cody's honesty created a chain of events that protected me. My choice to respond with genuine gratitude, rather than a handshake and a thank you card, meant that a young man starting his career got a real foothold. That matters. It echoes forward in ways neither of us can fully trace. My granddaughter asked me if I was lonely. I told her the truth, and she called me smart for an old guy, which made me laugh, and I held on to that laugh for the rest of the day. That's enough. Some days that's exactly enough.